Hello, my name is Craven. I am a dramaturg in New York City. I have a master's degree in playwriting, and I saw Bad Cinderella a week or two ago, and I have some notes. So I'm going to be splitting this into two videos, one that's about the writing, which I think is the main thing that's bad about Bad Cinderella, and then one about everything else. So we're going to start out in part one talking about everything else. So firstly, the music and the lyrics. Now, I'm not a composer, but I do enjoy music most of the time. And I did not really enjoy the music of Bad Cinderella because most of the songs were just a repeating motif, like a single musical idea that repeats over and over again, especially the songs in the first act. So all the songs, all the exposition songs, all of the songs that are supposed to set up the characters in the place are extremely repetitive. Like the scene where Cinderella and Prince Sebastian meet in the woods, it's just a single motif repeated over and over again. The introduction of the stepsisters, unfair, unjust, da 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 da, and it's just kind of that motif repeated over and over again with new lyrics. And most of the lyrics are not very good also. A lot of them relies really heavily on one-liners, like they sat down and they said, okay, the topic of this one is manliness. How many one-liners can we write down on a big piece of paper about manliness? And then they put all of them into the song. Like A Man's Man, that song, it's just that, the whole song. And most of those one-liners aren't really inherently funny. Like the performance of it can elevate it, which it did. The performance of a lot of these funny lines made me laugh, but the joke wasn't funny itself. The ballad, the songs that weren't that repeating motif kind of thing were mostly very short songs to move in between scenes, or the ballads, which there are a lot of in the second act, which, you know, Andrew Lloyd Webber is kind of known for putting too many ballads in the song. Flashbacks to Love Never Dies. And the ballads are pretty unsatisfying and really unspecific. Especially Cinderella's first ballad that's supposed to be the first moment of vulnerability from her. She sings about how it's not easy to be her in Belleville, the town it's set in, and how she wishes she could move to some place where it would be easy to be her. But when you actually look at the lyrics, they're incredibly vague and really generic and could be about any character who feels out of place anywhere in any musical. And that, a lot of that tends to happen in the ballads. They're not very poetic, they're not very beautiful. There's like one tune, the Prince's first ballad, Only You, Lonely You, I think has a nice kind of swelling motif in it, but that's kind of it. And when the songs that are establishing songs aren't very good, when the ballads aren't very good, when the few other songs that are not those two things are also not very good, it just starts to be maybe that the whole musical isn't very good, you know? Also, the lead singers, Cinderella and Prince Sebastian, first of all, Linetti, the actress for Cinderella, sounds better live than she does in some of the clips that she got roasted about, but she does have to put her full energy and focus into the highest notes and the most dramatic moments. And you can see the acting kind of slip away because she has to put her full focus into hitting and maintaining, especially the notes. Her vocal stamina for holding and sustaining big, beautiful notes isn't really all there. And I don't know if it was just that the actor playing Prince Sebastian, I don't know if it's vocal strain from singing the songs that he sings every night, or if it's just out of his range. But that song, Only You, Lonely You, which was the song which I thought had a nice tune to it, he couldn't hit the notes at the end. At least the night that I went. And it was the main actor, it wasn't an understudy or anything. So to me, on the lower parts he sounded fine, but I think that the song's just, if not out of his range, at the very top of it, and he is straining himself singing it every night. So that's it for the music and the lyrics. Well, no, I didn't talk about the lyrics. I don't like the lyrics. They oftentimes will set up rhymes or set up phrases that they don't really pay off in the lines following that. They don't use a lot of assonance or consonants to have a really satisfying sound that links the phrases together and makes them flow. There weren't really any turns of phrase that I found especially poetic or beautiful. Like there was, like usually in a musical, there'll be a line that someone says and I'm like, oh, what a way to put that. Nothing like that. Everything's very literal and very straightforward. Which, when the music itself is not very interesting, to have the lyrics also not be very interesting means that it's just bad all around. So that's the lyrics, which is a shame because the lyricist has a very successful history, so I'm not really sure what went wrong with this one. In terms of the production design, that is an area I think is an unequivocal good across the board. I did see a few pictures of the West End costume design to compare with the Broadway costume design. The Broadway costume design seems to be veering much more on the spectrum of modern to fairy tale. It's veering much more fairy tale. That's what most of the costume adjustments seem to be, with the exception of Cinderella, who's much more modern in, kind of like a leather duster and tight-fitting, like, it looks like a kind of a faux velvet pattern on the pants and a kind of cut out top with some boning on it, just like slapped onto it. So she is much more modern and in a slightly more muted color palette than the rest of the townsfolk, who in the opening number are wearing like sexy lederhosen. And then full ball gowns, and the queen and the stepmother especially, in really exquisitely crafted, gorgeous gowns. And then, the stepsisters in that kind of same idea in the terms of the shape, but in this really livid, like really putrid neon green and pink colors, which is nice. Stepsisters in any Cinderella story have to be assigned a color, and in this one it's the neon green one and the neon pink one. But yeah, the godmother's costume is very much like kind of a Victorian style gown in this blue with shimmers on it. The men have extremely straightforward, like tight pants, long coat, handsome muscly chest costumes, and they're not as colorful and they're not as elaborate. So I think the men really didn't, except for the opening number where they're wearing sexy lederhosen, and then they don't really wear that for most of the rest of the show. But the West End pictures, they seem to be much more of a blend of modern and fairy tale. Like, especially, I saw a little video of what the stepsisters wear to the ball and to the wedding at the end, and they're just kind of like little cute white dresses, whereas they're like, big floofy ball gowns in this. So it's definitely more on the fairy tale end. I think the costumes are really nice, except the Cinderella's being kind of incongruous with the rest of the show. And, there's the whole talk on social media about if Cinderella's ball gown is better or worse. I think the hair being, it continues this theme of Cinderella being in a much more modern style, which could be a deliberate artistic choice because she is supposed to be, rebellious. And if the big, beautiful, fairy tale, colorful costumes are supposed to be the beauty standard she's rebelling against, then the slightly more muted, slightly more modern clothes that Cinderella wears could be deliberate. Or it could be just kind of a weird choice. Like, she doesn't look goth. She doesn't even really look convincingly alternative. She is just wearing tighter clothes, like tight leggings pretty much, and a leather coat, and her hair up in some configuration. Whereas she looked more definitively alternative on the West End version. I think she looked much more like more punk, really. And I think that was a stronger choice in terms of characterization, to have Cinderella in that green and that dark gray dress with the forest on it. I think with black hair and black lipstick, I think that was a much stronger character choice. And especially because Cinderella's color palette in the Broadway version is just a muted version of the color palette of the townsfolk. So she does look different in that she's a bit more modernly dressed, but the color palette is the same, which I think is a weaker choice overall. The lighting was fine. And the audio mixing on the voices was not great, because I can occasionally have trouble understanding lyrics when everyone's singing really loudly over an orchestra. But I went with my best friend and I asked her if she was having trouble understanding the lyrics, and especially in scenes that aren't a person standing alone on stage singing. Like anytime there was a crowd, she was also having some trouble understanding the lyrics. So the vocal mixing, I think, could have been better. So the other main thing before we get to the writing in part 2 is the performances themselves, which I have to give major props to the cast of this show, specifically the supporting cast, because they are absolutely wringing blood from a stone. Like, anything funny or charming about this show is coming from the acting. Point blank. The actors and actresses in the ensemble seem to be having a blast. The choreography seems fun. The lines are all very silly, so they get to say them in the silliest way they think they can. So that's charming because everyone's being very silly and having fun. The queen and the stepmother are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And of course, you know, Carolee Carmello and Grace McLean are never going to give anything other than 110%. So whenever they're on stage, I'm laughing because it's funny, because they're funny. Not because the lines they're speaking are funny or would be funny in someone else's hands. They have to really overemphasize their physicality and their vocal play a lot of the time when they're saying these lines, because it's not funny to just say the line, but if she kind of gestures or wiggles or does some kind of maneuver with her head and her hands to deliver the line in a really punchy way, then it'll be funny. So I especially noticed this in the song Man's Man in the first act, where the motif is really, really repetitive. So in order to differentiate the lines and make each line land freshly, she has to like absolutely be doing the most physically all the time, or changing the way that her voice sounds in every line in order to differentiate them and make each one funny one after the other, when the tune and the lyrics are kind of the same thing over and over again. So yeah, I'm looking at notes, if that's why I'm looking down. Unfortunately, the leads, Sebastian and Cinderella, kind of fall flat because they're given a lot of the more straight moments in the show. And I don't know if it's an issue of direction, but they are never as big or as funny as everyone else on stage. So when they come out to talk and do their songs, it's just not as fun as the rest of the show, which is really unfortunate because they're your leads and you're supposed to like them and care about them the most. Also, I think that I'm not necessarily the right person to talk about this, but I think it bears mentioning. Linetti, the actress who plays Cinderella, is Latina, and she does have an accent. And still, it made me a bit uncomfortable because a lot of the time when she would be speaking straight or singing, she wouldn't have an accent. But whenever she needed to deliver a funny line, dare I say a sassy line, the accent would come out really strong. And she would change her whole posture at the same time. So she would be kind of talking like this, talking like this. This is a line. Sassy line! Like, but with a strong Latina accent. And since it's her natural accent, there's probably a lot of nuance to this. It might be a really deliberate acting choice by her. It might be that that's how she speaks in her real life, that the accent comes out stronger when she's being funny. or it might be a directing choice, and I would be really curious to see that those lines performed by an understudy who is not Latina, and see if what kind of choices they would make. So yeah. All right, everything else from now on is script and writing and characterization issues, which are my big sticking point and where I'll get upset. So if you're really interested to see me get upset about that, wait for part 2. And now it's time for the Dramaturg's big issue with Cinderella, Bad Cinderella by Andrew Lloyd Webber, book by Emerald Fennell. And that's that the writing of the show is very bad. I'm happy I have notes, or else I'll just devolve into a rant. When after I saw the show, I came home and I sent over, I counted 20 minutes of separate voice notes ranting about the show to my sisters. And a lot of it was about the writing, which I think is why you walk out of that show going kind of like, that's how you feel walking out. That's how I and my friend felt walking out of it. The lights came up and we were both sitting there with our hands, and I'm just like, okay. So, point number 1, nothing matters. There is not a plot point introduced in this show that gets resolved in a dramatically interesting way. Things just happen. And things happen that don't matter. I have a whole section of dropped plot lines. So, emotionally significant doodad. This is Cinderella's necklace. She gives it up without a huge struggle in order to get the makeover. And then she gets it back through pure circumstance that has no justification whatsoever. There's a change, I believe, between the West End and the Broadway versions, where on the West End, the kind of inciting incident is that after Cinderella defaces the statue, that means that Belleville doesn't win the Most Attractive Town award. This is going off of the synopsis, which that plot element isn't present in the Broadway version. They don't lose like the Most Attractive Town award or whatever that was. And it's not really replaced with anything is the weird part. Like later on, the queen is motivated to get the town again, and that's why she makes some of her choices to get the award again. But instead they replace it with the queen just being like, the people are gonna revolt, because that's a thing that peasants do. Like, it's a thing. There are a lot of moments of this in the show where the show will just kind of say something because it assumes you agree and know that existing point. So when she says, yes, the peasants are going to revolt, so we have to do something to distract them, there's no reason to think that's happening. The only person in this town who is against how things are going in any way is Cinderella. Everyone else is completely on board and completely happy. So there's no reason for the queen to feel threatened at all. So it doesn't make sense for that to be her motivation to then set the marriage and the ball plot in motion. So, very strange choice. Where was Prince Charming? What was he doing this whole time? Especially because he indicates a lot of things are given to you not in like exposition, but in a really quick throwaway line in a song, or in a really quick throwaway line somewhere. Like, the Charming says he faked his death so he could get out of getting into an arranged marriage because he's gay and he wanted to marry his true love, who is a man. And earlier the queen had talked about Sebastian continuing the family line, and that was why it was important for him to find a wife, as well as to have a big fancy ball and a wedding to distract the people. But she said quickly in a throwaway line earlier that she wants Sebastian to continue the family line. So when Charming comes back and he's like, I'm gay and I'm gonna marry my man love, the queen is like, cool. Two handsome men instead of one handsome man. So none of that meant anything or mattered at all. Dropped plotline. In the beginning, they try to kill Cinderella after she defaces the statue by tying her to a tree to be eaten by wolves. And then when she gets out, they don't do anything about it. They don't retry to kill her. She comes home and stepmother's like, you embarrassed me. You guys tried to murder her. And she's alive. And you're like, whatever. Okay. Cinderella, her motivations for not leaving Belleville, this town and people she hates, is because she like doesn't have money. So this which she already doesn't have. Literally the only thing that she's allowed to do is just sleep in the house. And she's a servant. She could go be a servant somewhere else. But the lines to establish why she doesn't just leave is the stepmother being like, it's hard out there for a girl with no money and no power. But then, later, she does decide to just leave. And she... and that's not addressed that she's now going to face this challenge she was afraid of in the beginning. She's just like, I'm out of here. Whatever. Okay, so the stepmother goes to the queen and blackmails her into... or tries to blackmail her into having the prince marry one of her daughters, the stepsisters. And the way she does that is by they have this song where they're talking about how they recognize each other from their, past down as peasantry before they became nobility by marrying up. And so, the queen and the stepmother were both like vaudeville performers or something like that. It's some kind of performing artist. And that's, so much lower than a noble woman and a queen. And so they're being like, yes, they're being very, very sly about it. Like, yes, I recognize you from the performance venue. And you did implied sexual innuendo thing. And so they have a very long, very repetitive song about that. But the thing is that the stepmother walks out thinking that she's succeeded and that the queen is going to have Sebastian marry one of her daughters. But the queen isn't going to do that. The queen's just like, Sebastian, pick which one you want. And he could pick any of them and she would be fine with it. And then at the end, when they're having a party to separate Prince Charming's gay wedding, the stepmother is like, I'm going to now out you in front of everybody. And she just doesn't. Like, the queen throws her out of the party. And then the stepmother sets it up and the music goes quiet. Like she's about to drop this bomb about the queen's humble birth. And instead she just leaves. Like, that plotline goes absolutely nowhere. There are guns all over the walls of this play that are still there and have not gone off by the time the play ends. The whole thing about how Cinderella goes to the godmother and gets, a stylist makeover. And the act is ending. So as she runs off and literally the curtains are coming down, this godmother is like, you have to come back by midnight. The pain of the makeover, you can only handle it that long. The only thing that indicates at all that the makeover is causing her some sort of discomfort is that the shoes kind of hurt because they're made of crystal, and she takes them off at one point during the ball. But she doesn't leave the ball because she's overwhelmed by the pain of the makeover at midnight, which would be like a symbolic thing because she's betrayed her whole moral stance to have this makeover. So to have it be also physically painful would, as well as emotionally painful, that would have been an idea. But instead she leaves because she's upset because Sebastian is kissed by her stepsister, which also happened to happen at midnight. So that the makeover being painful and having a cost isn't really present, because the cost was the emotionally significant dead parent necklace, which she just kind of is like, oh no, you can't have this. This is important to me. And she's like, don't you want to be hot and marry the prince? And she's like, you're right. And then after everything, when Sebastian is finally like, I'm gonna go to Cinderella and make this right because I've realized that she did care about me and we've been kind of not quite running into each other for the whole second act, pretty much, the godmother just walks on stage and just gives the necklace to him and leaves. Why did she do that? Why did she want the necklace in the first place? She said that the cost isn't monetary, indicating that it's supposed to be like a moral, emotional cost. But that isn't, the song she sings, Beauty is Pain, isn't about that. The song is about literally how painful it is to become beautiful. And then she just gives it back to him and he gives it to her. That could have not happened and nothing would be different. Dropped plotline, gun didn't go off. Ugh. Okay, so that's the dropped plot lines. There might be more that literally were so inconsequential that I can't even think of them now. There's a lot of things like that in the show. Another weird writing choice is kind of like a weird understated misogyny that's present in the script. Understated in the sense that the script is trying to make some kind of commentary about beauty standards, which it doesn't successfully do because it doesn't show any of the people who follow the beauty standard being damaged by it. So, but the men and the women are not given an equal treatment under the beauty standards are damaging yoke. They're not equally yoked. Because the women, a lot of it is they're beautiful and also stupid. And those things are linked. That the stupidness is what causes them to be so obsessed with beauty or vice versa. Whereas the men are kind of just like charming hunks. And they're really muscly and maybe a little bit reductive about what makes a good man. But they're not like... It's the himbo positive, himbo parentheses positive versus bimbo parentheses derogatory is literally what it is. Like the Prince Sebastian at the ball says a lot of really awful things about all these women who are saying really vapid and insipid things to him. And he says bimbo, he calls them bimbos at one point. And it was so weird of a choice because he's such like a mild character. To have him then be so angry and saying all these pejorative things about these women took me aback, genuinely. And yeah, a lot of the framing of the female ensemble cast is that they're beautiful and stupid. And the male ensemble cast is that they're hunky and they are really good. They love their prince a lot. Prince Charming. Their hunky, faked his death prince. So it's not an even distribution between the men and the women, it was just very strange. And then we get to the characterization of the leads, which is just structurally unsound, honestly. They don't establish anything, really. Like, you're supposed to walk in there and already think that beauty standards are bad, so they don't show or establish anything to tell you why that is. This town is beautiful and obsessed with beauty and shallow, but they're also seemingly happy and satisfied with that. You don't see at any point someone be hurt by these beauty standards and the obsession with image. The only people who are hurt by it are Cinderella because she is mean to everybody else and so they don't like her. And Prince Sebastian, who is just not as cool as his brother. And that's his whole character arc, is that he's not this other guy. I'll get to that. But they don't establish They just think you already agree with that beauty standards are bad. So they don't actually have to make any commentary or make anybody wounded by it because you already believe that. So when they make jokes at people's expense about plastic surgery, you're gonna laugh because you already think plastic surgery is dumb. So it doesn't have any kind of narrative punch to any of that because none of that actually matters at all. Even though that's kind of ostensibly what this interpretation of Cinderella is supposed to be about. That's what this Cinderella is different, is the beauty standards thing. And that doesn't actually matter, really. They don't establish who these characters really are beyond like one or two things. Cinderella's thing is that she hates everybody else. She's badass. I put that in quotes because once or twice people say that about her. She's badass because she spray painted the statue, and that's the only thing we see her do the whole show that is badass or rebellious, other than just be really rude to everybody. They don't establish who Sebastian is other than the fact that he's not his cooler, hotter brother. They don't, and most gallingly of all, they don't establish the love story. So Cinderella and Sebastian were childhood friends somehow. And they used to meet in the woods when they were kids somehow. And if they hadn't said that, there would be no reason for these characters to like or care about each other, because they don't really ever establish for us why they like each other. Just that they are childhood friends, and of course we know the trope of childhood friends, and we know that they're Cinderella and the prince, so naturally they fall in love. There's a lot of that, just like, you already know this, so we're not going to put it in the script. Sebastian has always loved her, apparently. And when he sings about why he loves her, it's not really that specifically about her. It's a pretty generic love song. Cinderella just is suddenly in love with him. There's not really a hint that they're anything other than friends for a while. And then the prince throws the ball and says, "Will you come to the ball?" And she's like, "Fine, whatever. I'll go as your friend." And then some girls are nice to him and she's sad about that. And then she starts making choices that somebody in love with him might make, but they never have the realization of love. She never admits to herself that she's in love. She never has to reckon with the fact, especially because earlier they established that she hated love and didn't believe in it. So she should struggle. That's one of the only characterizations of her they have, is that love killed her parents. And so she doesn't believe in love. That's one of the only things we know about her, other than she hates the beauty standards and is mean to everybody. So she suddenly is making the choices that she might make if she was in love with the prince, but she never wrestles with that change but in her, which is really she never wrestles with any change or internal issue ever. They just skip over those moments. So Cinderella specifically, she's unpleasant to everybody, which is supposed to be an act of rebellion, but everyone's also unpleasant to her. But it's kind of a which came first, the chicken or the egg thing, because they all make the point about how she's like ugly and plain, which the actress is objectively beautiful and in flattering clothes. So, but she's also just really mean and insulting to everybody in the town and clearly hates all of them deeply. Even the townsfolk who, like, she hates the stepmother because the stepmother married into the family and then the dad died and then she was abusive. Fine. That's the established stepmother archetype. But she's also she's even mean to Sebastian, her friend who she's in love with. She's just mean to everybody. And that's your heroine. And the show assumes that you're okay with her being mean to everybody because you agree with her that everyone sucks because they're shallow. But they, again, haven't set any of that up in any satisfying way. Is being against beauty inherently good? Because Cinderella is supposed to be good. in every other Cinderella iteration, that's her thing, that she's a good person, and that if you're a good person, that'll carry you through. That's like the moral of Cinderella. So there's nothing good about the Cinderella. So is her being against beauty the thing that's supposed to make her good? Whatever. I'm so mad because it just isn't. It isn't written. Nothing's written. There's no writing. Her character flaw that people tell her later on is that she's prideful and pushes people away because she's afraid of love. Okay, sure. Those might be character traits that an interesting character might have. But people just tell her that. Later on, when she's given up on the prince, and the prince is going to marry her stepsister, Adele, her other stepsister is like, if only you weren't so proud and resistant to being loved. That's not good character writing for someone to be like, this was your problem the whole time. And she doesn't even agree and have a song or a scene where she wrestles with that. She never actually has a song where she's internally struggling with her flaws that are making her life harder. Because they aren't. All the circumstances are just kind of happening around her. Nothing really is her fault. She didn't go to the godmother and get the makeover because of her pride and resistance to being loved. She did it because she thought the prince would like her more beautiful, despite the fact that he is vocally against that. And it betrays her apparently deeply held moral values about beauty standards. She's like, maybe the prince would like me better because my stepmother, who I don't trust and dislike, said so. So she goes to the godmother and is like, I want to be beautiful now. And the godmother's like, okay, give me your necklace. She's like, no, okay, fine. And she gives it to her. And she puts the clothes on. And she's like, wow, I'm hot. Excitedly. I saw a clip of that same scene done on the West End. And when she put on a ball gown instead of like a prom dress, and her hair was done up, she looked like the other townsfolk. And so it made sense narratively that she was becoming like them, and that was a betrayal of her values. But she does have a moment where she looks in the mirror and she does look beautiful, and that does move her a little bit. And she's like, why did I resist this? And it's this kind of sweet, tender moment, but there are no sweet and tender characterizations in the Broadway version. Every moment is played very confidently and very straightforwardly. She never actually sits back and is like, am I doing this for the right reasons? Did I resist this because I was being prideful or because it's actually what I believe? Like, there's no softness, step back, thoughtfulness, ever. But yeah, like, she gets the makeover and she goes to the ball and the prince doesn't recognize her, which is kind of an interesting idea, that he just doesn't recognize her. Not that he dislikes it, not that he likes it, but that he does not recognize it as her because she's given up her individuality. That's an interesting idea, but it's kind of ruined because he starts just like really awfully insulting her and all the other women there. And because it's her, you're like, oh, he's right about those other shallow bitches, but he's not right about Cinderella, is what you're supposed to feel. But you don't feel that way because there's no reason, it hasn't primed you to feel that way. And then he gets kissed by Adele, who is her stepsister, and she gets mad and runs away and is mad at him because she's in love with him. So she's mad that he kissed someone else, despite the fact that she knows he doesn't like any of those women because he just said so, and he doesn't want to get married. So she knows very well that he's not into any of that stuff that just happened, but because she's in love with him, she's jealous and upset about it. Again, we haven't really established that she's in love with him. So then he chases after her once he realizes that it's her, and she's like, get away from me, I never want to see you again. He's like, okay. So he leaves, and he has this kind of slightly interesting character moment where he stands up to the guards who have kind of been lovingly bullying him, and he's like, I'm your prince, and they bow out of respect to him for the first time, and you're like, interesting. So she betrayed her values by dressing up to go to the ball, and he betrays who he is, who, again, we don't know who he is, really, because we don't know anything about him, except for the fact that he's not his hot older brother. But he acts more like his hot older brother, which is a betrayal of who he is, and then people respect him. So, but it's such a short scene, and it's not really followed up on, because he's then a doormat and just gets married and doesn't stand up for himself in any other way, so that character change doesn't stick for more than the 3 minutes it's happening on stage. And then we get a bunch of vague, non-specific ballads that could be about other characters from other shows. And again, it's just circumstances happen. Like, the wedding is interrupted by the prince coming back to marry his gay fiancé. It's not Cinderella who interrupts the wedding because she had a character growth moment. It's like, I'm going to put away my pride and look silly in front of everyone to declare my love for Sebastian. No, it's not that. She doesn't have, she's like, I'm out of here. She doesn't have any kind of character growth moment. She just decides to leave, and then circumstances happen around her to make it so that before she happens to leave, the prince comes and finds her. And he only does that because someone told him to. Because Marie was like, hey, she's in love with you. She was gonna, interrupt the wedding, which she didn't. But she was gonna, so you should go find her because she's in love with you or whatever. And he's like, okay. And he comes and finds her and gives her the emotionally significant dead parent necklace. And she's like, oh, that didn't matter at all. And then they have a very, very short scene after a really long party scene, choreographed number that just goes, what a party, what a blowout, ba-da-da, over and over again. Very long scene for that. And they have a very short scene where he's like, where are you going? She's like, elsewhere. and he says, mind if I come with? Like, they don't have a discussion about what happened. None of the things that challenged their characters in this whole second act is ever discussed or hashed out or dealt with. The circumstances that made things more difficult just fall away because of outside elements. So they don't actually have to change as people. They don't actually have to confront their flaws. They don't actually have to think critically about their choices. The circumstances just allow it so that now they can be together. And literally, they have their first kiss and the curtain starts to come down. And I was so startled that that was how it was going to end, that I out loud went, that's how it ends? And the people around me cracked up because I was so incredulous that they weren't actually going to deal with anything. And it's just not well written. Nothing is important. Nothing matters. They end up, the ending, none of the things that happened in the show really caused the ending where they're happy together and they sail off into the sunset. Some temporary obstacles were put in place and then were pulled down by outside things. They didn't change. They didn't talk it out. They didn't develop or grow as people. They didn't have any personal revelations. They end the show the exact same people they started the show as, except now they've kissed once. And Sebastian doesn't have to be king because, luckily, his Deus Ex gay brother came back to be king. They're both completely passive throughout the whole show. And as a result, they are uninteresting characters who do not have any merit as a piece of artistic writing. That's the show. That's Cinderella. Technically, fine. Music, uninteresting. Performances, good. Writing, abysmal. So the average score is low. Because the writing, you can't have a badly written show saved by performance. You just can't. Because people are going to walk out and they're not going to care about it. They're not gonna walk out and have any kind of emotional attachment to these characters or this plot. They're not going to fondly remember the songs because they remember the emotion they felt while those songs were being performed, because there is no emotion attached to anything. Me and my friend who I went with and I both agreed that there were points in most songs where we just stopped paying attention. Especially the repetitive ones, but also in the emotional ballads. They would get to a point in the song where the like idea of the song had been expressed once, and then it was just like water flowing off of my smooth brain that has been worn down by watching the show. And that's not good if we completely check out during the music, because it's a musical. Anyway, I've now spoken for 45 minutes about this show. Originally, I was like, maybe I'll make a TikTok or two about this show. But clearly, I have way too many thoughts on it. And I think that Andrew Lloyd Webber's Bad Cinderella is what happens when you have a famous rich man who no longer has to be challenged or motivated by anything. You get a show that feels just kind of like, it's even like calling it Andrew Lloyd Webber's Cinderella or Bad Cinderella it just seems like an offhanded idea that he was like, I'm Andrew Lloyd Webber and I should do a Cinderella. It's like when he saw a musical version of Phantom of the Opera, and then he was like, hey, I should do a musical version of Phantom of the Opera. Did you know there were 2 other musical versions of Phantom of the Opera? One that happened to be being written at the same time, and that's unrelated. But one that he saw that they invited Sarah Brightman, his wife at the time, to play Christine. And he and Sarah Brightman went and saw it. And then he decided to do his own musical version of Phantom of the Opera. That's kind of what this feels like. That he was like, he's seen versions of Cinderella, and he's like, how would I do it? And then he wasn't actually challenged or pushed back on by anybody in the creative team, because he's Andrew Lloyd Webber and he's rich and famous. Emerald Fennell is supposedly a really good writer. I wouldn't believe it from this show. I think it's Zipple is the lyricist's name. Looking at his credits, he's supposedly a really good lyricist, but I wouldn't believe it from this show. Andrew Lloyd Webber has written songs that I like in shows that I like. But if this was the first thing I saw by him, I would think he was a hack. And it's just bad. And it never achieves camp and satire. It never gets to that point. It's not so bad it's funny. It's just bad. So hopefully, if you had a morbid curiosity and you're like, maybe I should see it, maybe it'll be funny to laugh at it. It's not funny to laugh at. I didn't laugh at it because it was funny. I wasn't laughing. There wasn't a moment where I was like, oh, this is so dumb, it's hilarious. It just wasn't funny. I sat there most of the show with this expression. So don't see it. Don't give Andrew Lloyd Webber your money. Go see something made by someone who gives a single crap about what they make.